Welcome. Thanks for joining me today, Torah Tuesday. Today we have Genesis 11 and 12, and we look at the pivot point in the story of Genesis from the first 11 chapters. And then at the end of chapter 11, we have a genealogy that tells us about the family of Abraham. And in chapter 12, we have this promise from God for Abraham, and the story just takes a massive turning point. And for the rest of Genesis and for the rest of the Pentateuch, we will be hanging out with this one family. So let's just have a quick look at the Tower of Babel story in chapter 11, and then we'll think about Abraham. Now, the Tower of Babel, it's a very short story, but it makes a very clear point. Humanity can't get back into the heavenly space by its own efforts. That's basically what this story is about. If humans and God are going to dwell together, it will be because of God's initiative. If you have a look at this story, it's short, it's only 9 verses long, and it's actually shaped like it's called a chiasmus or a chiasm. So the idea of this chiasmus is to show you that, and the central idea of the story is the center sentence of the story. And so the central idea of this story is that in verse 5 it says, the Lord came down. He is the one that makes the initiative in the story. If God and humanity are going to have any hope of dwelling together again, as was God's intention in the Garden of Eden, then it would be because of God's initiative, not because of human initiative, not because they're going to build a tower that will get them to heaven. And then we turn to chapter 12, and we have the story of Abraham, which is the story of God's initiative to make this happen, to make it so that mankind and God can dwell together again. So Genesis chapter 12, it begins with the call of Abraham. Now, it's worth recognizing that this marks a significant shift in the story of Genesis. We slow down considerably at this point. When many generations were covered in a single chapter in the first section, the genealogies, now 3 generations basically are going to take up 28 chapters. The story slows down significantly here. 80% of the content of Genesis is about the family of Abraham and his son Isaac and his son Jacob and his 12 sons that are the nations, the tribes of Israel. And so we start by getting some history about Abram. We know he comes from the family of Shem, Noah's son. His father is Terah, and he is married to Sarai, who will later be called Sarah. And we're told that she is childless because she cannot conceive. We're also told about his nephew, a man called Lot. And all of this stuff is going to come up again in the story later. So it's important to note these details now. And then God calls Abraham, to go from to a land that I will show you, is what God says, which is not a great deal of information. Hop in the car, pack your bags, head off. Where are we going? Not telling you. It's a land that I will show you. So this very act of gathering his things and his family and heading off, it will require great trust from Abraham toward God to obey this command. But the invitation to trust God comes with a promise from God. And these words might be the most important words for the rest of the Torah, for the rest of the Pentateuch. So pay careful attention. God promises Abraham 4 things. Firstly, he says, I will give you land. Secondly, I will make your descendants great. You will become a great nation. Thirdly, I will bless you, meaning God is going to protect him and help him to succeed. And then fourth and lastly, the whole world will be blessed through you. Now, this promise to Abram, it's going to be reiterated a few times through Abram's life. And it's actually going to grow and morph as we read along as well. So what land will Abram inherit? And how will he have descendants if his wife is not able to conceive? And how will the world be blessed through Abram? I really look forward to tracing through the story of Abraham with you over the next few weeks, because it is a wonderful story of faith, incredible faith, and failure, incredible failure. And we see that actually in microform in the chapter that we've read today, chapter 12. The story starts with Abraham trusting the promise of God, despite the fact that his wife can't conceive and he has a family history of being nomadic tribesmen. He follows God's instructions and he demonstrates great faith. He even builds 2 altars to the Lord along the way, and he calls on the name of the Lord. So we see this picture of Abram being very faithful. Bravo, Abraham, well done. But then the next story about Abram and his wife is that they're headed to Egypt because of a famine. And he tells his beautiful wife that she needs to pretend to be his sister so that he won't be killed on account of her. So, because she's beautiful, Pharaoh takes her as his wife, but God obviously isn't pleased because he gives Pharaoh and Pharaoh's household bad diseases because of this. And the story goes on from there. But did you notice that they leave the land of Egypt with more than they arrived with? They arrived and as a kind of dowry or a bride price, Abram is given many gifts. And it says at the end of the story that he leaves with those gifts. So God has kept his promise that Abram would be blessed despite Abram's failing. So God is faithful to his word, which is a wonderful reminder to us that despite our failure, our human inclination to be fickle and to do the wrong thing, God is faithful to his words. Now, the question I like to pose every time we do these videos, and we're going to pose it again today, is where does this story speak to the other stories in the Pentateuch, in the first 5 books? Well, this one's actually really, really interesting. Later, Abraham's family will go to Egypt because of a famine. Remember the end of the Genesis story? Joseph is in Egypt and the brothers go to Egypt because of a famine. And then when they get there, there will be a dispute about the truthfulness of a claim that someone is a sibling. So here, Abraham lies about his wife, says that she's his sister. At the end of the story, there will be a dispute about whether these men are really brothers or not. And then the Egyptians will be struck by diseases, and Abraham's descendants will leave the land with more than they came with. So we actually see that this small story in the life of Abraham is actually echoed generations later in the family history of Israel. What's the significance of this? Well, you'll see as you read through the rest of Genesis that this idea keeps repeating itself. The past is not allowed to remain in the past. This family will repeat the same mistakes generation by generation. They'll come up again and again and again. And God's faithfulness will be emphasized through all of these stories, but human fickleness and weakness will be emphasized as well. So like I said, I really look forward to reading through the patriarchal stories in Genesis with you. And can I encourage you to take great confidence in the faithfulness of God.